Okay, recording has started. All right.
All right, well, welcome to Pixels and You. This is going to be a really kind of basic introductory class to pixel art in general. It's just going to go over the fundamentals, actually getting it to work, what tools you can use, and at the end, kind of going into putting it in engines, and making sure you have it in a game engine all right. Just because I feel like it just goes over all the basic overview things. We're not really going to go too far into the detailed of how to make really complicated things, so we probably won't be making entire scenes, but we will be going over just basic asset creation, what tools you can use, good practices, and things like that. So, if we can go on. Yeah, well, I don't know if you'll be a pixel artist pro, but you will know how to pixel art. And you'll know how to at least do it consistently, hopefully. So that's, yeah, you should be able to do the Mona Lisa in pixels pretty easily after this. So an introduction. Pixel art can basically be anything. For this class specifically, we're talking about game art when pixel art. But generally speaking, you can use pixels for whatever you want. You can make normal artwork with it, like you said, the Mona Lisa. You probably won't be using that in a game, but it's nice to make just because it's art. You could do it for whatever reason you want. It doesn't have to be a game asset. And for this class specifically, like I said, we will be talking about game assets. So some of the stuff in this class might not translate 100% to just doing art. You might be able to disregard some of the stuff we talk about. But generally speaking, you can use pixel art for anything. Here I didn't make these. These are two examples that I really liked because they showed off different art that's just art. These aren't really for games or anything. It's just nice looking art. And I like the Elden Ring art, and I like the wizard shooting art. And hopefully I'm going to share this afterwards. Most of these images have links attached to them. So if you look at this and you want to go to like the artists, or if I talk about a game, I'll also link the game. You can click on the image and go to the link. I'm planning on sharing the slides for that. But yeah, the animation here is really clean. I like this. I like the screen shake. It's just all really cool. And does it pause every time I click out of it? That sucks. But yeah, I just think it's really cool. Oh, is it isn't changing? Is it on the?
It's
What
all
even
right
is
for
it changing?
me.
Oh, okay.
It might be Julie, you might have to exit and come back. Sometimes Discord's kind of funky.
Yeah, Discord can be glitchy, as I learned this morning.
Yeah.
So yeah, so basically, just overview. Art can be used for anything. You don't have to use it for games. We will be today. But if you just want to make whatever you want with art, go for it. You could just use a lot less limitations with that. But getting over to this, why was pixel art made? Like, what is it? As you might already know, a lot of older consoles couldn't exactly do high quality 3D graphics like we have. They were a lot more limited. Like for the NES cartridges had 24 kilobytes of RAM, or just not RAM, or memory, just in general. That's not a lot. So if you want to have really complicated visuals, you probably couldn't get that far. So for a lot of games, like especially on the NES or like the Genesis, which was a little more powerful for those graphics, you had to be a lot more limited. It's like this Super Mario Brothers. Every sprite has very specific limitations. You can only have very limited colors, very small sprites, big blocky pixels. Same with Duck Hunt and most other games in the NES, like Final Fantasy. So that's kind of why they started, even compared to arcade machines, because those had a little bit more leeway. They had a little more complicated graphics sometimes. Consoles were just very limited. So pixel art. Even though the TVs didn't necessarily use pixels, games usually did. So these are classic examples, like I said, very limited on what you could show. But it was really neat because artists were still able to make really visually pleasing and complicated things despite the limitations. And it kind of set a precedent for a lot of the pixel art that would come afterwards. It's like this, like, it's why do people still use it? Because obviously, we don't just have to work with the NES. We can work with modern computers, which have thousands of pixels on screen and way more processing power. We could run Elden Ring. Like most modern computers can run Elden Ring really well compared to Mario Brothers. That's a really big graphical leap, as you could probably imagine. So why do people still use it? The most obvious response would be nostalgia, because a lot of people grew up with this art, and seeing it in a more modern lens is really nice. Most people like nostalgia. That's why it gets sold to you a lot. But that obviously isn't the only reason, because we're kind of at the point in games where there's a lot of people who grew up without actually playing the NES or playing those older consoles, and they weren't exposed to that kind of art when they were younger. But it's still really popular, and it's still, like, people still really like it. And that's kind of where you're going to. It's just simple and charming. It's not too complicated, and it's usually really visually pleasing. And also with the modern stuff we have now, you can make it even more so with lighting and more varied colors than you could get back then. I guess I have a few examples here. Shovel Knight's a big one. It looks really nice, and it harkens back to the NES look. Celeste, obviously, is a really popular one that still uses pixel art. Octopath Traveler takes a really interesting approach where they use 3D and 2.5D art, where they mix 3D and 2D art. I have Anolin on here, which is kind of it intentionally uses simpler arcade-like graphics, which I really like. But just generally, people like it. And yeah, I would also like to see that remade in Octopath style. Octopath is an amazing style. It isn't strictly pixel art. It's like 2.5D, 3D art mixed with pixel art, but it's still really cool. Like one of the best looking pixel art games, I think. It's just really nice. Yeah, HD 2D. It's really nice. That would be another game I would love to see remade in that style is Chrono Trigger. Because one, I want to see more Chrono Trigger stuff. Two, it would just look really nice to make that in HD 2D. Like the environments in that game already look really nice. But I mean, yeah, it's a generally nice looking style despite it being simple. And so even though people, like some people haven't grown up with it and don't have that nostalgic tie to it, they like it. And it's still really popular. And also just kind of going ahead, from an indie game perspective, it's popular because you're already kind of forced to wear a lot of hats. As I'm sure you know, being in this community and just being in the development sphere in total, you wear a lot of hats when you do game development. And especially if you're doing it solo, there's a lot you got to do. Pixel art and kind of 2D art in general, just to oversimplify, kind of combines some of those hats, and I'll kind of explain that. If you're doing a 3D game, there's a lot more stuff you have to learn. You have to learn, for one, how to 3D model itself. You do the UV unwrapping. You have to use external programs to make the textures, and then any of the really advanced texture stuff you want to do, usually you have to use an external program, depending on what software you're using. You have to make sure you rig it correctly. You have to make sure the poly count is optimized. There's just a lot of stuff you have to do 3D. For any development with pixel art, it's a little simpler because it's a little more accessible. You can kind of do it all in one program. Generally speaking, you can do it all in one program. If you want to animate, if you want to just draw it, you can do the whole thing at once. And you don't have to learn a bunch of different skills. Again, very generally speaking, if you really want to get into pixel art and you really want to do it advanced pixel art, you do have to learn a lot of individual skills, but it's just accessible. And for a long time, it's a lot more accessible than 3D than it is now. You can make pixel art in basically anything. Like it says here, even MS Paint. If you want to use Paint for pixel art, you can, because you could use pixels in it. So any art thing you can imagine, you could probably make pixel art with it. Whereas 3D, for a long time, it was a lot harder because a lot of the good tools for 3D were paid. So not as much of an issue now because we have Blender and a lot of open source things. There's a lot of free 3D stuff. So nowadays, it's not as much of a problem, but that's kind of another reason why it's, yeah, like Tess said, it's the doom of art. It can run on anything. And again, nowadays, there's so much more 3D stuff you can get into that it being more accessible isn't as much of a factor, but for a long time it was. And that's kind of why a lot of indie games lean towards that. It's just it runs on anything. If you have an art software, you can do it. And it's just a little more accessible for developers because it's all in one place. You kind of get rid of some of those hats, which is nice for development. So history of pixel art out of the way. A little lecture. I don't know how helpful that was, but I hope it was at least a little more informative. We can actually go into the stuff you need to know when making it, which is going to start out with resolutions, which is just the very basic stuff. The pixel is the smallest unit you can measure on your screen. Your screen has thousands of them. And this is kind of screen resolutions. 1920 by 1080, that's a lot of pixels. When we're talking about pixel resolution itself, this can be described by a few different people in a few different ways. I personally describe this as the asset resolution when you just talk about the pixel resolution. So say you have like a box. That could be 16 by 16 pixels, which is really small, or 32 by 32 pixels. That's going to be the resolution of that asset. Screen resolution, and this is something very specific to games. This is why I mentioned before, pixel art can be anything. The screen resolution is going to be specific to your game. If you're just making art for art's sake, you don't really have to worry about this as much. But when you're making games, you have to be very conscious about how your pixel art scales, because otherwise you might get some weird results that I'll kind of go into later. A common one that people use is 320 by 180. This is kind of convoluted why it does, but it just scales really well to 1920 by 1080. I left a link here that kind of goes to a video that talks about it. This really helped me. When I watched it, it just goes over why you have to pick the right canvas size for pixel art games and why scaling is important. And he kind of explains why you come to the conclusion of 320 by 180 is really the best you can go for in the scales of that for pixel art games. So if you're going to work on a game with pixel art, I would go with that resolution. So 320 by 180 or 2 times that, because you're going by multiples of 2. Otherwise, you get really weird results. So yeah, for just the screen resolution, that's good to keep in mind is you have to make sure everything fits together. The assets might be 16 by 16, but they have to fit into a 320 by 180 viewport for your game. I don't know if this is making sense. I'm listing off a lot of numbers, but that's just as a complete introduction to pixel art. This is the kind of stuff you have to keep in mind when making it for games. Yeah, just resolution, it can be really frustrating because if you get a really weirdly scaled resolution, your art might look really weird in Engine, and you might not know why. And this is just a reason. Even though we have thousands of pixels, the pixels have to go somewhere. So if it's not scaled correctly, they're going to look really wonky. 1920 by 1080 would be 320 by 180 because that scales really nicely to 1920 by 1080. So I can't remember the exact thing. I think it's. I'll have to. I might. Let's see. I'm just gonna pull this up really quick. So, for instance, if you multiplied 320 by 4, you get 1280, which is obviously 720p. That's the one below 1920 by 1080. If you keep scaling, if you're scaling it neatly, and then you get to 1920 by 1080. I'm terrible at math, but it is magical. Resolution is a pain. But math is important in this case, and it's not complicated math, but it's just like multiplication. No, the tile size is going to be 16 by 16. This is so pixel resolution. Maybe I need to rename this. So I'm renaming this to tile resolution is going to be 16 by 16. Yeah, I use Opera GX, and I have this mod that gives like really sci-fi sound effects. I do like it. It can get a little annoying if you type too much, but I do like the sound effects it gives. Yeah, sorry that it came out of nowhere. But, so that's tile resolution is going to be 16 by 16. These are the individual assets. The screen resolution is your whole screen. This is what all the assets are going to be in. It is the canvas. And that needs to usually scale with 1920 by 1080 because that's the most common resolution. At least right now. We obviously have bigger ones, and I'm pretty sure this would still scale well. Ultra-wide monitors, you might have to look at a different resolution. It's definitely a really complicated thing. This is just the basics of it, where if you're going for a game that's 1920 by 1080, 320 by 180 is good because it scales well. If you don't scale, like, if you scaled 1.5 instead of 2 times, you would get really weird visuals because you're not doing a whole pixel, you're doing smaller ones, and it gets muddy. I kind of have an example of that later, but that's the gist. So does everybody kind of get resolutions before I continue? I know it's all over the place. It's a little complicated. I tried to dumb it down a bit. Like I said, that video helps a lot. It'll be in the slides when I release it. Yeah, I mean, scaling big and going down is also good. Like, if you have a big resolution, divide it by 6, and that's usually a good thing. Dividing it by 6 or 4, just divide it by a whole even number, and you'll be good. Actually, I don't even think it needs to be even. It might just need to be a whole number, and you'll be good. All right, so shapes. Again, really basic. Everything is made of shapes, and I'm about to get to the point where I'll actually be making stuff in an editor to kind of explain this because it's hard to just explain. But this is a general art term too. Everything can be made of shapes, generally speaking. If you look at it, you can kind of figure out which shapes it's made out of. And for pixel art, this is very important. You'll probably be using squares and rectangles. But if you just want to make something, start with a shape. Even if you don't know how to make it, throw a square on there and mold it to fit what you want. I kind of have some tools open here that I'm going to go into. You can follow along, or you don't have to because we have a whole section later about that. But for now, I'm just going to be using a software that anyone can use. I would usually use Sprite, which is the pixel art software I prefer to use. But in this case, if anyone wanted to follow along, I wanted to make sure I was using stuff that everyone here could use if they want to. So that's why I have these two up here. Let me unpin these. So we have pixel art, which is fittingly named PIXIL art. And this is free. You can just go to the website and use it to make whatever you want. You can make pixel art with it, obviously. I really like this site because I found it recently, but it has like challenges you can do where if you just want to make something and you don't know what you want to make, you could just go to the challenges right here. And generally it just has a lot of nice stuff. Piskel is another one that a lot of people use. That's free. It's also online. You could just use it in your browser. It's pretty flexible. I like Piskel because it's a lot easier with palettes, which I'll get into in a minute. But generally speaking, both of these will work fine. For this right now, I'm probably going to be using Piskel because of the palette thing from later. But if you're going to make something, you just press Create Sprite. And ignore this. It does say my browser is not supported, but I haven't run into any issues yet. It's probably supported on your browser, and I am going to copy these just in case if you wanted to use them. They're really nice softwares. Sprite is great. I think it's pretty standard for pixel art. It's the best I can think of, but it is paid. I think there might be a free version. I don't know for sure. But to get all of the tools, it is paid, and it's like $20. And I know that some people just prefer to use free stuff, and that's fine. Especially if you're getting into it, you don't need it. So these are pretty good alternatives. But yeah, shapes. To make sure. Yeah, I kind of feel bad that not everyone can join. It is weird because I did think that they was set to 99. That's odd. Yay, I'm popular. This is great. Hopefully, I don't ruin it. So, yeah. But well, I guess it's, as long as everyone is kind of caught up to where I am, I don't want to go too far ahead. I'll wait to make sure. Again, you don't have to follow along with this. If I can provide the links to the people uploading it if needed, so they can add it, definitely. There's a whole resources thing I can copy from that I kind of put together. I can give them to Salem afterwards, yeah. But yeah, I've linked these, just a bunch of videos and just tools and stuff at the end, which should be helpful. Some of which I won't go over in the class, but they are really helpful. But yeah. So as long as everyone kind of knows where we are, like you can make stuff out of shapes. We're about to do it. You can follow along if you want because I added the links. If not, you can just watch because it's not going to be too complicated right now. But yeah, so if everyone's ready, I can get started on this. start off, I'm going to just do very simple, which is a crate or just a box. I mentioned this before. Yes, both of these are free to use, Piskel and Pixel Art. They're web based, so you can use them on pretty much any browser. Mine technically isn't supported, but it still works. So maybe I'll run into issues, but for now it's completely working. Both are free. You don't have to pay for them. You can make basically anything, and you can export them, which you can use for engines. So if you just want to make pixel art and you don't want to pay for anything, these are really good alternatives. And then for this little thing, I'm going to be making a box. Very basic shape. Everything's made out of shapes. This one's the most obvious shape. It's a square. So if we wanted to make, let's say, a dungeon, and we wanted to create, I'm going to make a box that is 16 by 16, which is the resolution I mentioned earlier. Can move this. If you are using the program, maybe I should go over the tools first. This makes a rectangle. It's pretty self-explanatory. You can make a box, and the numbers at the bottom right are going to show you how big that box is. So this is 3 by 3, this is 4 by 4, 5 by 5, 6 by 6, and so on. It goes over how big the canvas is. So right now the canvas is 32 by 32. You can kind of scroll out with mouse wheel, obviously. Pencil. You can draw whatever you want. It is a pencil. Control Z to back. Circle. Self-explanatory. Again, it's a circle. I don't know. Okay, this one also has a line tool. That's what I was looking for. Lines. Basically anything you need. The tools are pretty self-explanatory. This is the selection tool, which you can use to select. And then, okay, maybe I don't. Weird. Well, I'll just move it like this. I haven't used Piskel. I don't know how you say it exactly, but I haven't used it as much as Sprite. Yes. I actually have some resources that I'll link that kind of go into. They're actually series. There's one YouTuber who's done a really good series. It's not necessarily a course, but it's a whole YouTube series that goes over a bunch of individual pixel art things. It's going to be a lot more detailed than we're going to do today. That's really good. That's something I watched when I was first getting into it because it covers so much. As for specific courses, there is one that is like an actual course. I don't know as much about it. I will talk about it once I get to one of the next panels because it goes to the site where that's hosted on. I have not personally done it, so I don't know exactly what the course entails, but it is a pixel art specific course. But other than that, I do have a lot of videos and stuff I'm going to be linking that goes into extra resources if that's what you need or mean. So yeah, glad that works out. Now here we have a box. This is 16 by 16. Not very exciting. Well, one thing we can do is if we don't want to add any color, we could just keep using this. And if we want to make it a little more exciting, we could say maybe this is a crate. So we can have a line here. Hey, now we have 3 squares or 3 rectangles. We have a top one, a bottom one. And if we keep going and we just add more lines, now we have 5 rectangles. Everything shapes. And it's kind of starting to look like a crate. Maybe not fully. You can add some lines here. And look, we got a crate. It's so simple. You're a pixel art master now if you've been following along. You're done. Class is over. We've done it. Not exactly. But you can make anything out of shapes. It's just, if you want to make stuff, squares. Yeah, congratulations. If you're working on a game, maybe this isn't exactly what you want. There's a few issues with it. Obviously, main one, there's no color. Maybe you might notice, hey, one of these lines look off. It's not placed correctly. Like, hey, just having an outline is kind of boring. Well, obviously you could fix the stuff you thought was wrong, like the line. Might be a little wonky. Now it's not. But it's still a little boring. The good thing is, you can add to it. You know what would make this a lot less boring? If there was some depth to it. If you want to, you can go to wherever the board. Like, imagine this is wood. Step back a little bit. Yeah, your pixel art game is a 1-bit thriller with just boxes, so you're sold. You're done. This is it. Great. You package it. You're finished. I feel like most people aren't making 1-bit games that only feature boxes, though. So, going back to what I was saying, imagine this is actual wood. And like in real life, wood planks, they might go on a bit. So if you wanted to hang off the edges, you could do that. Maybe these boards are a little longer. And they go over the top and bottom. That can look nice. There's a little more depth to it now, so it's a little more interesting. I opened the wrong thing. You could do the same for the bottom ones too, so they go off the edges. And these, you might notice, you can't exactly cut because it looks awkward. We could still have them because it kind of implies that this board ends over there. And now it's a little more depth. It has a little more character. It's not just flat. Yeah, your box-based 1-bit games box is going to look great. It's a little more interesting. And of course, in this case, we're not really doing too many strict resolutions. So we could, this is obviously now over 16 by 16. Normally, if you're working on your own project and you're not too strict on yourself, this is fine. If you have a very strict resolution, like this needs to be 16 by 16, you can work with that. I'm still figuring out how to, let me see. Okay. That's how I move it. That's how I was figuring out. So you can move it. There we go. Now it's 16 by 16. Look at this little box. The lines got messed up a bit. But still, look at how cute it is now. And now it fits within the resolution you need, which is great. Basically, all this is saying is, if you start with something really simple, like just a box, you can keep adding stuff to it to make it interesting. You can add some depth to the edges, make it look a little neat with a little more character. And it's just a box. Yeah, and like, if you wanted to make a 1-bit box game, you're done. You could use the paint bucket and just fill this with one other color. Oh, and boom. There you go, Mark. You're done. Your game is, all the assets are finished. Yeah, see, so if you've made this, you've made pixel art. And you've made pixel art and iterated on it to make it more interesting. Like with most art, iteration is key. The thing you start out with probably isn't going to be the thing you end with, usually. Getting feedback and stuff will help you change and add to it or modify it to keep making it better. Like, okay, say if they told me the gray is a little weird here, what if it was a wooden box? Then you would choose a color that's probably a little better for a wooden box, like this. And done. It's been iterated on, and you keep doing that until it's finished. And I think this is shapes. Yeah, because I don't want to go too far ahead with the colors. That's shapes. So if you were following along again, congrats. You're now an amazing pixel artist. You're a pro. You're done. Mark, you got your assets. Everyone's happy. But maybe you want to make this a little better. So that's when we go into choosing your color palette. This is very important. You don't really need palettes. They're not completely necessary, but they will help you a lot. With pixel art and art in general, you can use any colors you want to. But using palettes can be helpful, especially if you want to keep a consistent look. Colors are very hard. Some artists make their own palettes, which obviously is the most freeform way to do it. You have the most control. Yeah, next step, guns. You could shoot the boxes, they'll explode. But yeah, next step, if you want control over your palette, you kind of have to make your own. And that requires a lot more than just knowing pixel art. If you're going to make your own palette, you need to go into color theory. You need to go into color specific, how they interact with each other, how they look together. It's a whole other skill set. One I'm still learning. I'm still not the best at it. But one site that I use a lot and that a lot of pixel artists can use is LowSpec, which is a great site that has a ton of pixel art palettes that you can use. They're all completely free to use. A lot of them go well together. I can open it. It's the other one I have pinned over here. LowSpec. If you go to their website, they have the latest palettes, 4x4, or 4x4 palettes. I'm going to copy this. That's low spec. A lot of color palettes, which is going to be really useful if you don't want to make your own, but you still want to keep a consistent palette in your games. If you start off, you're going to have all this stuff, and if you just want the palettes, you go to the tab that says palettes, and boom. There's so many palettes on this website, way too many to count, and use whatever you think looks nice, whatever works for your game. And you can pick up here how many colors you want. So if you only want 8 colors, you press exact, and boom, palettes with just 8 colors. I can't remember the name of the game off the top of my head. The SLS-08 one might look familiar because that was actually used in an indie game that kind of came out kind of recently. And it actually looks really good. A lot of these palettes, you could use them. Creating your own color palette, that's something that I will go into, but I'm not an expert on. So it's just picking colors, but you have to pick the right ones that interact well with each other. Again, it goes into color theory, and you kind of have to learn how colors interact with each other in a satisfying way, how they go together. I'm still not the best at that specifically. I'm still learning it, but I will go into how to make your own. Right now, I'm just kind of going over if you're not completely certain that you can pick the right colors, this is a good site. Just because it has a ton, you can go very specific or not specific at all. If you want only 2 colors for your 1-bit game mark, they have so many 2 colors. If you don't want it to just be black and white, they have so many dual tone colors. This is probably one of the palettes you can make on your own too, because I mean it's just 2 colors, but still. If you want 32 colors, there's a ton for that as well. There's so many options, and again, they're all free to use. It really, really does help when you're trying to make a consistent style. There's a lot of 2 colors. There's a surprising number of 2 colors that people can make. But yeah, there's just, depending on how specific you want to be, there's so much here. For this one, I'm probably going to stick to just kind of show you how to use this. Because now you have palettes. That's great. How do you actually use these? This is why I picked Piskel, because their method of importing palettes is a lot better than I think Pixel Art's is, at least from what I've used. Say I wanted to choose one of these palettes for my box. I want the best palette that's going to work for my box. Let's see if I like one through here, if they will load. I might have to reload the screen because I've been clicking around too much. Question, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I was making sure my internet didn't turn off because of how slow it was to reload.
No, you're fine.
I'm like, oh, okay, there we go, finally. So say for my box, I want Sketchy 8. That's the color palette I want. You could just click on it. And again, for some reason, this website is a lot slower right now. You can click on it, and here it is. You have the individual hex values. So if you just want the hex values, you can use those. You have all the colors. It shows you obviously who made it. You can credit them, which is, I mean, just a really nice thing you could do. And if you want to download it, you just download it down here. You have a bunch of different sizes you can do. I think 1x1 should work. I'm going to download this one. And you just download it by clicking on it. And I don't know if you can see my files, but if not, I'm just going to be saving this to palettes folder. You could just save it to downloads too if you want. I might actually, would it be best to share my screen? I will be doing that when I get to the engines. But yeah, you just click on that and it'll take you to the downloads, and you could just download it to a file. And to use it in Piskel, you just go here on palettes. And you could do, where was that button again? Let's see if I can find it. You press this, which again, I think that there's no icons. I think that might be one of the issues of my browser not being supported. There should be icons under palettes, and the leftmost icon, which is going to be this one, when you click on it, you can add a new palette. And to add a new palette, you just press import from file, and you can click on the one you downloaded, and boom, it's right there. So this is the palette. You can save it, and now we have access to it in the editor. It's just a few clicks, and now you can use this. Now we can recolor our box to be more consistent with this palette. We could use this color. Great, we're already a little more consistent. And we can even do, now that we have a palette we're working with, we can even be a little more specific with how we're coloring it. So if we wanted some parts to be darker, like let's say there's a shadow, we can just choose this darker color that's a little darker than the one we're using and put it under that. Or if that feels a little, it works, like we could put this here. Oh, you could put these anywhere you think there'd be a shadow. Like, see, these boards are obviously overlapping the other ones. There's going to be a shadow between them. If you want it to be over that crossbeam, there's a shadow under it. Very basic shading, just darker colors where you think a shadow would be. But one thing you might notice is the shadow works. It's a little hard to read. It's like the colors bleed in a little awkwardly. So you can experiment with the palette. This one's probably better for shadows because it's a little more bold. The contrast is greater, so you can tell it's a shadow. See that? You probably do one up here. And look, now our crate has shadows. We're making it even prettier, and we're iterating even more. Like, if you look at it, say, hey, our game doesn't have pitch black. That just doesn't exist in our palette. That's fine. We can go over it and make it this softer shade. And now we're kind of fitting it along with the palette more. If you want to, along with the shadows aren't the only thing that items have. They have highlights too, so you can pick a brighter color. Where do you think, let's say there was a light right above this. You don't need to be a lighting expert, but knowing a little bit about lighting is good. If there's a light right above this box, there'll probably be some shine, maybe at the top there. Like, if it's beaming straight down, it'll probably be top here too, and maybe down here. And now our box is looking really pretty. We have a lot, and this is just using the palette we have. You have, once you know the colors you're using, you're able to put them a lot more accurately, and you don't have to worry that you're going to be changing a lot later. Yeah, it's a pretty box. It's a really shiny box, but it's still, and it's simple. And this is an asset you could just use in a game. I mean, at this point, it's basically done. You have a box, a crate. And then all iterated from, again, a square. You just make a square, and you can make most things out of that. I'm going to see what Mark's saying. Yeah. Let me tell you, Mark, if you think 4 colors is revolutionary, let me surprise you with how many colors modern computers can use. I think you might be a little bit behind on things. You have access. Yeah, there is more than 10 colors. You have access to thousands of colors, Mark. Well, hundreds at least. I don't know the specific number, but I know you have access to a lot of colors. It is too many. It's a good point. It is too many. Which is why we use palettes, because it limits your options, and when you have limited options, you can be a little more creative. Limitation gives creativity. Obviously, you did it. Congratulations. I like that box. That's a nice box. Yeah, and it looks really nice. You are now a pixel art master. Congratulations. And obviously, like, this isn't the only way you can do a crate. If you want to add on to it, you can. You don't have to make it the same color even. I have a very limited palette, so I can't make things too crazy, but this crate specifically would probably, it's 16 by 16 tiles. So going into how things work, admittedly, this probably isn't going to run on the NES because it has even more strict restrictions. But I would consider this a little closer to 8-bit. The colors might be a little, I think the colors work too. I would definitely consider it closer to 8-bit because that kind of goes into the color space. You're not going to be seeing this on the Genesis probably. You'd probably be seeing something a little more detailed. This is something that, I mean, you've probably seen a Mario game. It might be a little too detailed for Mario Brothers, actually. That's why I said it's a little complicated. When working with modern pixel art, this would probably be closer to 8-bit when people think about what the bits are than something like a really, really detailed crate. Oh, go on, sorry. Oh, and I'm sorry for breaking your mind, Mark. But yeah, and I just realized I'm taking a lot longer than I thought I would be. But just to answer that question, this technically isn't a specific bit. Fun fact, most things you make nowadays aren't going to be strictly 8-bit. Your computer is probably like 64 bits. 32 or 64. Or probably, I don't know the exact number. I'm not that smart. I'm mostly smart about pixel art stuff. But your computer is not going to be 8 or 16-bit. The whole thing about pixel art is you're emulating it. And in this case, I'm kind of going over generals. So we're not picking a specific one. We're just doing what looks nice. If you're like the Shovel Knight developers and you really want to go for the NES look, you are going to have to be a lot more specific in terms of how many colors objects use, like how big a sprite is. And that's kind of what I was saying earlier, where we have a lot of free room when it comes to how big this sprite is, because if we're not making Shovel Knight, we're not making something that sticks closer to the NES resolutions. If you are, you have to do a lot of research. I wish I could go over all the specific stuff in this class. I only have so much time, so I really can't. But if you're doing a specific game, you're kind of going to have to go into research of this console, what were its limitations? And then you have to emulate those. And the good thing about modern hardware is you're probably not going to do it exactly like they did it on the NES. Shovel Knight didn't. They have really nice parallax backgrounds that weren't possible on the NES. But they use it because it looks nice. It looks like the NES if you're looking at it, but it isn't technically exactly the same as the NES. So because we're working on modern hardware, even if we want to emulate a style, we don't have to stick strictly to it. Which is just, again, ranting kind of. That's a really long-winded way to say this is probably closer to 8-bit, but it's not going to be 8-bit exactly. But yeah, so this is our crate. You can keep adding stuff using the palette. Maybe you want to make the edges look a little not so bland. So you do this, and now it has an outline that's a little more interesting than just one color. That's our crate. Again, we've made pixel art, and we you know where to go get palettes now. So if you don't want to make a 1-bit game, you can use that. Say, you know what, halfway through development, we're like, our game uses a different palette. Crap. Well, we got to go back to low spec. And I mean, you probably wouldn't be going to low spec. They would probably be giving you a palette if somebody's telling you this. But yeah, we would go to this, and you'd be like, you know what? We have to use. Now we have to use calculated. That's the palette we have to use now. And if you don't want to click on the thing, you just press the download button right here. And this opens it up. I'm going to have to press save as the palette. Here we go. So you know what? Now they want us to use calculated. Well, now our box isn't consistent anymore. But all you gotta do is just go through and fix the colors. Like this is a blue box now. People might get mad, maybe say it's unrealistic, but you know what? Art doesn't have to be realistic. Sorry if you hear my dog. Look, now we have a metal box. Yeah, it's a night box. There we go. This is now a box at night. That's actually a really good thing is for some games, let's say you have a daytime and a nighttime in your game. You might use 2 different palettes for daytime and nighttime. And this would be a use case for that, where maybe boxes would look a little bluer at night because of the sun. Or not the sun, the lack of sun, so it's the moonlight. There you go. It's just, palettes are very versatile, and this whole thing is just, palettes are great. I don't actually have any resources. That's something I probably should have added. I don't have any specifically for making palettes, but I will look for some, because I don't know as much about it, but I'm sure other people do. And that would be a good thing to add to this link list, because if you do want to make your own palette, it's a little more complicated. And like I could probably do it right here. Say I want to make a palette. You do the same steps. You press the create a palette button. But instead of importing a palette, let's make my own. Let's say I want a green palette. So I want a dark color. I can add a new color. I want a lighter color. Add maybe a little mid color. And I can kind of just add colors and save it. Now I have this palette. This palette probably isn't that great, I'm going to be honest. It's like a knockoff Game Boy palette that's slightly off. But we could still use it because it works. You could still use our custom palette. Do not steal. And you might notice, hey, this palette looks off. The shadows don't look right. They're actually brighter than the crate in some areas. So you just click on palette, manage this palette instead of create palette. It's the one to the far right. Yeah, this is a bamboo box. You can manage this palette and say we want to change this one. All right, let's make it a little closer to these and just make it a little darker. Great. And now we could just, okay, that's not the right tool. There we go. Now we can just go over it. And now it looks a little more like the rest of the colors. There we go. Yeah, this is a Shrek box. I like that one. This box doesn't want anything in its swamp. I'm mostly using, I know that maybe a crate isn't the most exciting thing to start with, but I'm just using this to show you. Even the simplest objects can take a lot of iterating and take a lot of thought into them. Like you start with just a square and you add on to it. You add the colors, and by the end of it, you have a nice looking box. And importantly, and this is something I'm going to go into in a bit, it's consistent. That's kind of why we added the palette. It's important, at least at a base level. Again, art is very subjective, so this might not apply to everyone. But I think it's very important that you're consistent with your art, which is where palettes come in, because they give you consistent colors. Everything works together. And going kind of forward, again, finally going on to the next slide, because I'm realizing we are running out of time, but we are getting close to the end. Fundamentals, consistency, which is something I've talked about a lot. These are two games that I picked out because they're really good at consistency for two different reasons. Shovel Knight is the most obvious one. Shovel Knight looks really good. It uses a limited palette, and it uses a lot of the NES limitations. And with that, it's a very consistent looking game because they don't compromise on that. Generally speaking, again, there is some things like the parallax, but it's still consistent looking, and it looks nice. Celeste is the interesting example where, at a base level, it doesn't look consistent. And this is why I said that art is very subjective. If you look at Celeste, the game itself is pixel art, but the text is high quality art, it's high definition, and so is the character icons. Now, if you just had this, it might look a little odd. The big thing is it's for accessibility reasons. Pixel art text can be really hard to read for some people, and a lot of people just don't like it. So having high quality text is good, but it can be inconsistent. Celeste is a case where they actually did something very interesting, and they turned something that might be considered inconsistent into a very consistent design philosophy, which is, if it's not in the game world, it's not pixel art. The only thing that's pixel art in Celeste is the game itself. Any user interface that you interact with in that game is going to be HD art. The level select is HD. The character sprites are HD. The main menu is HD. There's even 3D models in the level select. But it's consistent because they don't mix it. You're not going to see pixel art in the level select screen because that's a user interface. Anything the user interacts with is not pixel art, but the game itself is. And that's a very intentional and very nice design philosophy that I think is really interesting. It's something that if you just had high quality text and everything else was pixel art, it would look really odd because it would be very inconsistent. And some people might even say it looks cheap in some places because it makes it look like you hadn't put as much thought into the text itself. Whereas with Celeste, they did. Everything is very clean and consistent, and your brain kind of recognizes this. I feel like you're not going to think it looks weird that there's nice looking text in Celeste when you're playing it, because it just looks nice. It's nice to read, and it's a lot more accessible. And obviously, it worked out because you don't hear people complaining about the text in Celeste. I chose this example specifically because it looks inconsistent until you get into the actual game and realize that it is consistent. It's just consistent in its own way. If that makes sense. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent because I don't want it to get confusing, but I hope that made sense. Like, even if things are not in the same style, you can still make them consistent as long as you make the rules consistent. I would say for color palettes, it's good to think about your project as a whole. You can do individual assets, but you might run into an issue. So say you chose a palette because it looked really, really good with fire. Like it made the fire in your game look really nice. But then you realize afterwards that the colors in that palette don't work with much else. So the fire looks really nice, but the crates look a little weird and you can't get grass. There's not a really good green color in it, or there's not a really good bluish color. It doesn't you designed everything around this specific item, which is great. But if you're doing like a whole game, you have to think about the game itself. If you're looking at a palette, you have to think about how much you can do with it. It's limiting, and that's the point. But you don't want to make it too limiting. And well, thank you for being here, Margaret. I did like to see your box. That was really nice. Again, sorry, I know it's a little late, so if you do have to go, that's completely fine. I was talking a little longer than I thought I would be, so I do apologize. It's going a little bit over. The good thing is it's recorded, so if you do have to go, I completely understand. We are it's getting a little closer to the end. I will try and kind of hurry this up. And I know I said we do engine implementation. That might have to be like an after class thing if people do stay, because I might not be able to go fully into that with the time we have left. But yeah, just to answer that question, I would say choose the palette based on your game as a whole, if that answers what you were what you were curious about. And you can experiment, obviously. You can change the palette if you have to later. But I think it's just a good thing to keep in mind. Like, think about, could I do more stuff with this palette than just fire? Unless your game's entirely about fire, in which case, go for it. But still, if that answers the question. I hope it does. But yeah, so consistency, I went over it. As long you don't have to just use pixel art, basically. If you want to use high quality text, I would, but make sure it's consistent in your game. So if you use high quality looking text like fonts, yeah, I would say the color palette should be for the whole game. Going back to that, just because it's consistent. Now, like I said, if you want to, you could mess around with that. A really interesting game that I like is called Downwell, and that game only has 3 colors, but it has a bunch of different 3 colors and has a bunch of different palettes. And you could use any of those palettes you want. If you want 2 palettes for your game for 2 different sections, like say one set at night and one set during the day, and you think you might need 2 palettes for that works too. You just need to make sure it's consistent, so that all of the assets in the scene should probably use the same palette, or at least if you really want to use 2 different palettes in the scene, use ones that complement each other. Yeah, thanks for linking Downwell. It's really good. It has such a simple style. With the adding additional colors, Roberta, yes, it's your game. If you want to add additional colors that aren't in the original palette, go for it. Especially if they look good. Like if they work with the palette, you could definitely add colors. There's nothing wrong with that. You just have to make sure that they're consistent with the rest of the palette. Obviously, if you were making a game for the NES, you wouldn't have that freedom because you're stuck to a very specific palette. But because we are in modern gaming, if you want to add a new color to the palette that isn't already there, you can do that. Like if I go back to the crate, and I say I'm going to load the. Actually, I'm just going to press Control Z because it's a lot faster. So if I go back to the crate, and it's the blue crate again, let's say, hey, I want the outline to be a little darker. That's fine. I'll just go to the palette, go to the outline, if I can find out which one it is. Actually, it might not have changed the outline for this one. That's fine. Say I want the outline to be a darker shade. That's fine. I can add a new color. I can manage the palette. I can add a new color. Let's say I want this darker and save it. That's not in the original palette, but I can still add it. And it works. For the most part, it works with this palette. Completely fine. If you want to have your own colors and add them, we're not working for an NES game. Yeah, the blue crate, it is odd, but I do really like it. And but yeah, you have a lot more freedom. If you're making your own game and like you're not stuck to a specific set of rules, then yeah, add to the palette. As long as it looks like consistent and the colors work together, it's fine. I mean, some people like to do the personal challenge of like, oh, I want to do Game Boy, so I'm only going to use 4 colors. If you stick to that rule, you're not going to be able to add any more. But if you're making whatever you want, sure, it's completely fine. Yeah, rules are fake until you're working for someone. So like obviously if you were to join a team or like a group that's already making a game and they only have like other pixel artists, if you get hired to make pixel art and they have a specific palette, you probably can't add colors. Generally speaking, this was probably designed intentionally, so you're probably going to have to stick to that palette. And that's where you get creative. Just figure out ways to make that palette look good. But if you're working for yourself, do whatever you want. That's the fun of art, is you have complete freedom, complete creative freedom. This is kind of the last serious slide. Going to wrap this up. What to avoid. These are just really quick things. Mixels. What are mixels? Mixels are when you have 2 different pixel sizes. And this can be as a result of the resolution scaling awkwardly, which is why I said we'd get back to that before. If the resolution scales awkwardly, you'll get mixels. And here I'm using Danny, which is a character from a game I'm currently helping to work on for the IGA Level 3, which I was told I'm allowed to share the art from this for some examples. So for Danny, yeah, a genius way, it is a great way to test your creativity is to use limited palettes. But yeah, so for Danny, it's, if in the original down here, it kind of, all the pixels are the same size. But over here, I kind of gave an example of what happens when the screen scales awkwardly. And you'll see that the pixels aren't all the same size. Some are really big, some are small, and it comes together to look really awkward. That's what a mixel is. And you generally want to avoid this because it looks a little cheap. Like a lot of people, if you're playing a game and you see a mixel, you'll notice, unless it's intentionally designed, which is a very, very rare case. I feel like a lot of games don't intentionally use mixels. If you are intentionally using it, you have to be careful of how you design it because it goes back to consistency. Mixels are generally inconsistent because the pixels are inconsistent sizes. And if you see this playing a game, it's going to look a little cheap. So you do want to avoid this. This is why we talked about resolutions before. Because if you scale it correctly, you won't get mixels because the resolution scaled awkwardly. That can happen, which is why you need to be careful about what you use. Or throw that rule out. I added this example very specifically. If you don't recognize that heart, can anyone tell me what that heart's from? It is from Undertale. Undertale is a very successful indie game. Oh gosh, I did. I'll have to look about that. I think I can give out points. I actually have something that I'm going to be giving out points for in a minute, so I don't know if I can give them out right now. Okay, Salo can. Give that man house cut points for being the first to answer it. But yeah, Undertale. It's a very successful indie game. It's made probably millions of dollars. That sprite is one of the main sprites you see in the game. It is basically the second player sprite. and it has mixels in it. So it's just something to think about when it's like, this is a rule to keep in mind. But you're never going to be perfect. If it looks good enough for your game, even if it has mixels in it, even if you want to avoid those, it's fine. One sprite having mixels in it isn't going to completely destroy your game. Undertale is a very popular game, and it has mixels in it. Like one of the main sprites has it in it. So even though it's something you want to avoid, like all rules, they're made to be broken. So if you really want to go out and try it, go ahead. I'm just kind of giving you the basic rules to keep in mind. But I added that specifically to say, don't treat these rules as completely concrete, because they're not. Like, they're good to keep in mind and they're good to avoid, because generally speaking, it doesn't look good. But it's not going to be the make or break for your project if you do have mixels in it. The second one here is hard to read palettes. This is why I was saying earlier that you can add colors as long as it makes sense. I have a recolored Danny sprite here. As you can see, the palette doesn't look as good. It's a little harder to read, and like some of the stuff bleeds into each other. You can't see the shadows as well of like where things should be shaded. It's just something to keep in mind. It's just the palettes, try and make them a little cleaner and easier to read. Try and make sure that if you have a shaded color, it's dark enough to be noticeable shade. It's not like super, super bright. It's not barely noticeable. It's just stuff to keep in mind. And yeah, like Mark said, the rule of cool. If your game would be cooler, or if it would be finished, which is the important thing, if what's stopping your game from being finished is, hey, I might want to redo the heart sprite because it has mixels in it. Maybe you don't need to do that, because the important part is it's done. It's good. It works, and if it works, it's good. So these are just, again, stuff to try and avoid. But if you can't, it's fine. And then this is kind of the last Q&A. I feel like we did a lot of the questions and stuff during the class, unless other people had questions. Again, I know this wasn't a very in-depth look at like complicated assets. This was more of a general overview of pixel art as a whole, and I do hope it was at least a little informative, especially with like some of the tools you can use, because it's very easy to get into. The barrier to entry for pixel art is very, very slim. So it's just, if you want to do pixel art, you could just start. There's nothing stopping you. It all begins with the box. That's a good takeaway. Even characters. Like, I'm not the best at making characters. I will be completely honest with that. But when I do, it starts with a box. You use a box for each individual part. So for a good next step, that is a good question. I would say a good place for... Actually, I'm going to go through. Okay, I'm going to go through these in order. So to answer Mark's, a good next step would just be, like I said, I have some video tutorials that I'm going to be linking. Those go over a lot more in-depth, specific parts of pixel art. They go over like tile sets. They'll go over different objects, foliage, stuff like that. It's a really good series. It is a whole series of videos by one person, and they're all really good. They answer a lot of pixel art questions. Again, I'll be linking all of the... Pixel Pete is one of them. I don't remember exactly. It might be the one I'm linking here. Pixel Pete stuff is great. I know one of the things I link is actually, let's see. Oh yeah, I need to join his Discord. I love his videos. They really help me. But yeah, so the videos, and then again, just make stuff. I know it sounds cliche, but if you want to grow at something, you can watch as many videos as you want, but you're really going to get the best bang for your buck if you just sit down and try to make something, and then share that with people and get feedback on it. Like So answering the other question with that, where to send here if you want feedback. I would say in this server, the best channel might be help each other. Correct me if I'm wrong. You might want to make a thread and help each other for critique. Again, other mods and other IGA people, correct me if I'm wrong. So it's first channel I think of as help each other. So that would be a good place to send for feedback. We're actually going to have a surprise thing in a second that might be good for that. The other questions. Is there a guide on going from traditional art to pixel art? That's a harder one. I personally am the other way around. I went from pixel art and started doing traditional art, which I'm still kind of learning. So I don't have as much experience going from traditional art to pixel art. I really only have experience going the other way around. A lot of the practices do carry over. So, like, if you know traditional art, you might actually have a step up on somebody who's just learning pixel art, because you'll understand like anatomy. You'll understand how pictures and art generally comes together to look nice. You'll understand proportions. Once you know those things, it's pretty easy, at least for me, to compare them. Like just draw like you normally would in a smaller resolution. I know that's not the most helpful, and I actually don't have any resources for that in this list. I will have to look up some to add because that is a good question. I would just say it's all about experimentation. And then the second one was dark outlines versus not. That's a good one. A lot of pixel artists might be like, hey, oh, and finally the GIF is working. I don't know why it wasn't working before. They're dancing for you. You did it. So dark outlines versus no outlines is a big debate. A lot of people debate over this. It really depends on your art style. Like, so for this crate, if let's say we don't want outlines, like we want this to be an outlineless crate, well, that's fine. But we could just do this. Go over it again. And this is where we kind of have to go and use the other colors we have, just to make sure. It's a lot harder with a limited palette, I'm going to be completely honest. But you can do stuff with no outlines. Trying to quickly get this right. So this isn't perfect. I would actually say it's a little hard to read some of this, but this is kind of the general thing where you can make stuff without outlines. Yeah, they got very excited over the outlines, but it really depends on your style. It can look good, but again, and I keep going back to this, it is all about consistency. If only one of your assets in your game has an outline, it probably doesn't need one. But if every object has an outline in your game and you make a new one and that doesn't have one, it probably needs one. As long as your game is consistent in its art style, that'll be really good. Another thing you can do is say you want outlines, but you don't want just a black outline. You can kind of do a middle ground where you have colored outlines that are a little more interesting. And just that's not as dark as I thought it was. Let's see. I'm gonna add one here that's just a slightly darker version of this. This is gonna have an outline technically, but it's a little less boring than just a black outline. It's a little more colorful. It's a little nicer than just having black all around it, which is another thing that, visually speaking, it really depends on what you're going for. Okay, the GIF isn't going again. Why aren't they? Okay, there we go. Like, why aren't they dancing? I thought it was cute, and then it didn't show up. But yeah, like Brian said, that's really important. It depends on your game, and it depends on the look you're going for. I am going to kind of go over some of the resources, just for anyone who wants to say that look at it right now. Before everyone goes, for Outline versus On. Again, it depends on what you're doing. It is very subjective. I personally usually do start with an outline, but it doesn't always work out. I'll share it in a second because I do want to get through the slides, but I'll actually share one of the project files I have and kind of go over how I outline it. But it is very subjective, and different people prefer different things. So to finish this off, bonus quest. I will answer any more questions after this, but I wanted to go over this. Oh no, the king needs your help. He recently acquired a brand new castle, but wouldn't you know it, he forgot to furnish it. Here's the quest. He's come to you to help him with his problem, the most skilled craftsman in all the land. He wants you to make items to put in his throne room. So, how to complete the quest? Make one or more, if you want to, assets to fill out the room. That's it. You can use the site that I linked. It doesn't have to be any specific resolution. Just make an asset to put in his room. The optional challenges, you can make it 16 by 16 pixels. Make it consistent with the environment. In this case, just make it something that would make sense in a throne room. It's really freeform though. You don't have to follow these; they're optional. Just make something to put in his room, and if you send it to me, I'll put it in a throne room, and we'll have a little collage of everyone's assets in one room at the end. And the rewards. This is why I was hesitant about giving out points. The first 5 people to complete this quest will get 2 house cut points. It's not a lot, but I wanted to make sure that there was room for a lot of people to finish the quest and actually get rewards. And anyone who doesn't get points will get bragging rights. And also, again, I will kind of combine all the art at the end to make a little collage of everyone's assets in one place. But yeah, it's just that's the limitations. You can make it in 16 by 16, and this isn't the whole room. You just need to make an object for it. It can be a box, which we went over earlier. You can make a fancy box, and you can make a barrel. That's a little more rounded. It's a little harder, but it's a nice challenge. The really hard challenge would be if somebody here would like to make the throne for the throne room, which is a chair. It's a lot of squares to make a throne. But yeah, it's very freeform. Whatever you want to make, and I'll add it to a collage. And the first 5 people who make something, it's the castle gate. I actually love that. I was gonna say whenever you finish something, you could share it and celebrate your wins. So I'll make a thread for it, and I'll actually go on and make that. Yeah, it's the overdid. I do like that. Let's see, where's celebrate your wins again? I'm gonna make a thread so we don't clog, just blow up the channel with a bunch of stuff. Not everyone has access to the art chat, so that's why I wanted to make sure. Here, let me make this. There we go. I've made a thread for it. So the first 5 people who finish something and put it in that thread will get 2 house cup points for completing the quest. And the king will be very happy to fill out his throne room. If you're like, what the heck? Where do I get stuff for this? Here's the resources tab. And I'm going to be linking this in this chat shortly. I'll probably also put it in the Celebrate Your Wins chat. An art gallery in the Gather would be fun if we had a weekly art contest, or not a weekly, a monthly art contest. But yeah, so I'm going to really quick share this actually. Let me make sure it's open to anyone. There we go. So I'm going to share this right here. You can get the resources. They're on the last panel. But yeah, so here's a quest. Adventurers, you are free to go if you want to do this. I am going to be going over some of the resources. If you do want to stay, there is some extra stuff I'll talk about. But obviously, I don't want to keep people too long. We are over time, almost half an hour. So for now, this is the quest. I'm leaving you with the challenge. Thank you for joining me. I hope this was at least a little helpful. And I'm excited to see what you make for the throne room, of course. Like I said, really quick, I am going to go over the resources I didn't talk about in the class but are really important. First, I've linked to all the tools, even A-Sprite. It's paid. Yeah, Spriter's resource, I've added that on there. One important resource for a lot of artists is referencing other artists. I have been reading a book recently called Steal Like an Artist, and it's a little cheeky. You're not actually stealing anything. Don't do that. Don't trace. That's bad. Don't copy sprites one-to-one. But referencing is always going to be good. It is a really good book. So the Spriter's resource, what that is it's a website that is a bunch of game sprites that are taken from games. So if you go here, there's so much stuff here from so many different games. And all you have to do is click on them and you can download the sprites and open them in an editor and you can look at them and see how the artist did it. And again, don't copy it. Like, don't copy the art and like change the colors in a little bit and use it as your own. But just learn from it. You can just look at how other people did stuff and learn. Like recently I was looking at like Stardew Valley sprites because of the team I'm on. We're making a game that's similar to Stardew Valley. So now I have all the Stardew Valley sprites I can look at and learn from and see how other artists did it. But yeah, that's a really good resource. Again, a lot of videos. These are videos that goes over from a bunch of different people. They go over the canvas sizes. They go over the basics of pixel art. Pixel Art 101 by Pixel Pete. That's the one you mentioned. That is the whole playlist that has all of the different videos on it. On the right, unfortunately, I could not get to engine implementation in the class. It was a lot longer to explain the other stuff than I thought. This goes over it. This goes over how to get pixel perfect art in Unity, Unreal Engine, and Godot. I might have to make another class later entirely on implementing these in Engine because it is a little complicated. It's different for each engine, and it's simple once you know how to do it, but you actually have to learn how to do it. So
I think that's completely fine just to jump in because I know that Sanya was doing Godot for C Sharp, and that was supposed to be a single class, and now she's doing like another follow up class to finish what she was talking about. So I think that that's perfectly like feasible to do.
all right, yeah, cause it's definitely an extension of this, and I was gonna kind of put it at the end, but I think that would take another hour to explain, and I don't want to keep everyone here for another hour.
No, yeah,
But
yeah, I totally
you
get
can go to
that.
these videos. Going into, let me see if I can share my screen. Because somebody mentioned, would you start with outlines or not? This is actually something that I brought. This is something I'm working on right now for the game we're working on now for the current level 3. And I did get permission to share this. I am allowed to share these stuff. I do start with outlines. And this is kind of how I show my layers. You have a reference. I know how many pixels we need. This one did have a kind of strict pixel size. The bridge had to be a 144 by 80 pixels, or 80 by 144. And this is just because that's how large the river was. And you can kind of see, this is A-Sprite. It's 80-ish. We still had some leeway, and the reason I say it's 80-ish is because this buoy goes over that, but it looks nice. So I think it balances out. But yeah, I usually start when it comes to pixel art, getting rid of all the extra layers with just outlines and gray. Especially now, because this is something I actually learned in the past few months. I don't color when I start. I just use gray. Gray, just grayscale completely. This is for contrast. So like if you want your character to be seen in front of it, you don't want it to contrast too poorly with the character. So if you do everything in grayscale, you're going to be able to tell if something is too too bold. So in this case, the boards on the bridge can't be that bold, so they're lighter colored. Yeah, so it's very important that you get contrast right, and this is something I struggled a lot with, and until I learned this, where it's like you do this in traditional art too when you're painting a scene. Normally you would use grayscale, and then you can get contrast with that and get lighting with that. Lighting makes it a lot easier too. So once I do the base thing, which is this, I'll kind of do details. Like some of the boards are a little lighter colored. I made sure that this was a little more colored. Some slight details there. And then shadows. That's a big one. It's literally just you go over it and you make some parts black and you make it transparent. Now you have shadows. Highlights is the next thing I'll usually do, which kind of makes the edges really nice looking. It's like a little, it's the closest thing to a Fresnel effect in pixel art, I think, which just looks nice. And then for colors, I have 2 color layers, which is color multiply and color. These are 2 different blend layers. One multiplies the color onto the image, and one just adds the color. Multiply is darker, like it's a little darker, which I like for the bridge. But just color works for this little UI icon where you're doing the task. So you can use them for multiple things. And again, this is kind of how I generally do layers. It looks a little complicated, but I think I'm getting it. I think I do it pretty consistently across projects. But yeah, I start with outlines. Again, it's subjective though. So if you just want to start with the shapes, you can do it. But yeah, that was officially Pixels and You. So I'll probably also put this in the Celebrate Your Wins thing. So if you need to get the resources, it'll be there as well. And yeah.
Yeah, I'll definitely round up like all of your links and like, hand them over to Jess so
Yeah,
that
and if you need, I can give you them all. Like I can just DM them to you, just a list.
that would actually be great. Yeah. That'd save me, some time.
Yeah, I mean, I can just do that. Yeah. And then also, we have Brian said it's great. If you're making characters, and I don't know if I have anything, let's see here. Do I have anything on my computer I can use as an example for that? I'm going to open up one of the other projects I worked on. Layers for characters is very important. I'm trying to find the... If you're animating a character, just making sure it's in different layers makes it a lot easier to animate. Otherwise, you might be overstepping on some of the art. I'm trying to find the animated file for this. Let's see. Okay, now this file is going to look really confusing when I show it to you. So yeah, Mark, the thread is in Celebrate Your Wins. I made a thread for the pixel art quest. It's in Celebrate Your Wins. I'll link it here too. Copy link. I don't know if this was going to switch over. Did it? I don't think it did. I might have to stop sharing my screen and start again. But this is a lot more complicated of a scene. And this one is not as organized. This is one big animation, and this looks so cluttered. Yeah, this is Finance Phrase. This is something I did recently. I actually really like how this looks. I wanted to try doing a ruin, like a little ruin image. I don't think this is the most clean, because I did this over the course of a few days. It was really disorganized. But this is kind of what Brian was saying, where, yeah, this is like where if you're animating characters, separating them into individual pieces is really good. Like, so for Cassie, I have the head, now they're headless. The where was it? The torso, the arms, and the legs. And this is what makes up the character. And it's a lot easier to edit the individual pieces when they're separated like that. And it's the same for Roxy, where the head is one piece, the torso is one piece, the arms, and the legs. It just gives you so much more freedom to animate individual pieces when they're all separated like that. Yeah, the one piece. And then I also have a separate sprite for the glowing one, which that one isn't as segmented. Uh, this is kind of what made it a little more complicated. Was I didn't segment the glow, so that had to be animated individually, and overall that one was a little less optimized. But it all comes together. So it's a lot easier to animate it like that because it's like in 3D when you have different rigged pieces, like Brian said. If you're going to be making a character, that's a little more complicated than what we went into today. But if you are making a character, separating them into pieces like head, torso, arms, legs, it's going to make it a lot easier to animate it. But yeah, I was trying to think of it because I saw Brian mention that. I'm like, actually, I should have something to show it, and that's what this was. But yeah, so that's most of what I had to share. Again, thanks everyone for coming out. I am sorry that it dragged on for like 30 minutes past when it was supposed to, but thank you all for being here. Again, I'm glad it was fun. I hope it was informative. Uh, I know we didn't go into like the really super advanced stuff. Like you're probably not going to be remaking like Chrono Trigger visuals with this at this point, but it should hopefully give you a good starting point to go through and really learn the rest. These are just a good starting point, and I hope, and I can't wait to see what you all make with it, because pixel art can be really nice, and I just think it's a really fun medium.
This lecture
Camera
was
perfect.
really good, Chase. Thank you so much for taking the time to just come and like talk to us about pixel art.
Of course, and thank you all for being here. This is the first time I've done a lecture like this, so I'm glad to hear it went well.
Yes, it was
I
very good.
I tried making it a little more interesting than just me reading off a list of words, but that's why I kind of added the quest because I thought that might be fun for people to actually make stuff. And I really like the stuff people have made so far. I'm seeing all the art.
Yeah, it's awesome. I think it was very what's the word? Interactive. It was very interactive, and that's always a good thing.
Yeah, that's what I was really hoping to go for that because I'm like, it's art, but I feel like it's not. You can't get the point across as much if you're just showing images. Especially when a lot of it has to do with the tools you're using.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I use Sprite. That's this, but Sprite costs $20, and especially if you're just starting, you might not want to spend all that on like a program. It's like pixel art, Pixel, or that kind of stuff. It's great.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, if you're gonna stick with pixel stuff and animate it, especially, I would say Sprite is the way to go. Uh, you can use anything for pixel art. It's a lot harder to animate with pixel art without having a solid program for it. Sprite is made for that. It's made for pixel animations. And if it's hard to read the pixel text, I added a theme in the links. It is a modern theme for Sprite, and it replaces all the pixelated text with high resolution fonts.
Oh, question in the chat. Are we all meant to be using the same palette to keep the throne room consistent?
Uh, Again, it's an optional thing. If you want to, I can find a palette. I actually didn't have that ready, but I can definitely grab one really quick. But if not, the consistency really was just for the room. So like, just make sure it made sense to be in a throne room. Um, but here I'll grab. You know what? This one sounds fun. You can use the Lovecraftian lens palette.
Oh, that's so good.
I'll put that in the chat. But this is of the thread. Um, that was a good question. I probably should have added a palette, but there we go.
We have
Yeah, the
one now.
consistency. Yeah, we have one now. The consist because I didn't want people to feel too limited. The consistency was really on like the objects you made.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, palettes are good just to have one.
Okay, I think as we close out, I'm just gonna advertise for the week ahead since I don't know, usually I do that when I'm moderating classes and stuff.
That's fine.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so as usual, we have our indie game lunch hour on Wednesday. Um, and then the following day, Thursday, September 19th, we have level 3 beta night. Chase, you must be so excited for that. um, so we recently had alpha night and all the teams got valuable feedback, so now we'll be coming back with beta night. That's going to be taking place in Gather, so that's going to be super fun. And then Friday, September 20th, we have 7 steps to starting your indie studio. This class is helpful in general, but it's also really good if you're looking into the new Foundry program. And then, let's see, that same day, we also have Godot for C Sharp Part 2. So I did say this earlier that Sonia was doing that class and then kind of went over time. So this is going to be the Part 2 of that course. And then, yeah, that's just this coming week. So definitely attend those. Yeah. This was a really good lecture, Chase.
Thank you.
So
It was
much
really
art.
fun.
I see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the good thing is a lot of the environment stuff is done. Now it's the fun thing about animating characters,
Oh,
which takes
yeah.
a long time. So it's, but yep, I am excited for it though. I'm excited to see everyone's games because it's just been really cool to see the evolution of all the different ideas over the course of the class.
No, yeah, it's always so fun to do that and to just go on that journey with a bunch of other people. Even if you're on separate teams, it's always cool to see what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, I mean, uh, and just the ideas are so varied. It's always really nice to see.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. All right, I think we're going to break for tonight. Or morning.
All
I don't know.
right,
Happy time zones.
yeah, the time zone.
Yeah.
But yeah,
All right.
yep.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, and thanks for coming. I can't wait to see your pixel art stuff.
Yeah, definitely send that, you guys.